Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Thursday, November 23rd. I'm your host, Tom Moore. The game against Michigan is in 2 days. Today we got our buddy Ross Fulton, Buckeye Huddle's X's and O's guru on the show, which means today we are sponsored by Jeff Ruby's Columbus, proudly offering nationally acclaimed USDA prime steaks, seafood and sushi, impeccable service, live entertainment, and an attention to detail that is simply unmatched. Go to jeffruby.com/Columbus to check out the menu and make a reservation today. Okay, so normally when we have Ross on, we're going into the nitty-gritty on the previous game, and okay, let's look at a couple different plays and all that kind of stuff. We know what week it is. We know it is Thursday. We know we could do an hour and a half of like, okay, here's the 17 different things they did against Minnesota, and all anyone in the comments is going to ask is, what's going to happen against Michigan in 2 days? Ross, please tell us. So that's the show. The show is going to be forward-looking. We're not talking really about Minnesota. We're looking at Michigan. What is going to happen on Saturday? Ross, we're going to start with the Ohio State offense. We're going to start with the Ohio State ground game. It feels like there has been tangible progress with the offensive line throughout the course of the season. It feels like getting Travion Henderson back and healthy has made a significant difference there as well. How effectively is Ohio State going to be able to run the ball against Michigan on Saturday?
Well, I think they have to be effective. I think that you can expect Michigan and Jesse Minter to play quite a bit of split safety coverage schemes that they have all year. So it wouldn't surprise it to be any different in this game. And, you know, when they've done so, Michigan's had some trouble with that 7-man spacing fitting the run, particularly with everyone's favorite play, stretch. Minnesota had success running stretch paired with the jet sweep opposite against Michigan. Maryland did the same. Penn State had success running counter Trey to the same side as the halfback. So, you know, the pieces are there for Ohio State, obviously on film. The key, just like at an execution level, is Michigan's probably strongest at defensive tackle of everything on their defense. You know, Ohio State's center or guards have been pretty good. Carson Hinsman's had his struggles. And so in terms of just a matchup, that's probably like the one in terms of personnel that needs to be watched. But like from the Ohio State perspective, they have to keep doing what they've been doing, which is like if teams want to play them with split safeties, you know, run the football, play action off of it, keep mixing in, you know, weak zone with counter Trey and power, keep running the gap schemes. And, you know, I think a key, and we'll talk about this, is like they have to stay ahead of schedule. You want to force Michigan then on early downs to go single hide or to fire zone, and, you know, bring cover 3 deep, 3 under pressures. And then, you know, when you're mixing the run game in, like take advantage of the fact that Michigan wants to play, particularly to the field. They'll play pretty soft corner coverage. We can talk about this more, but like Michigan's biggest weakness on defense is that other corner. Like whether you want to consider that Wallace or, you know, if they bump Sandersill outside from nickel to corner and then put McBurrows in the slot, like that's then the weakness. Like they basically are down a cover body. And so, you know, I'm now bleeding into the next segment, but there's, you know, discussion of like, will they have Will Johnson follow Harrison? Like, I don't think that gains them a lot because you're telegraphing your coverage. And like, I think what's made Michigan's defense really good the last few years is like how the diversity of what they do in terms of like their zone pressures. And so unless Will Johnson's repped a bunch in the slot and you can run everything from that, you're now limiting yourself. But like if they do that, then they're just leaving themselves vulnerable outside. I mean, I would take certainly Ibuka and Julian Fleming as plus matchups, but like, so, you know, I think on early downs, the key, as I said, is like mixing, particularly when like Michigan is in split safeties, be patient. Like, you know, harkens back to what Ryan Day talked about after the Rutgers game. Like, you're just going to have to like, you know, I think they're going to want to make Ryan Day prove that he'll be patient and that Ohio State can execute down the field, you know, rely on Travion Henderson, mix that with hitting those easy comeback routes on the outside, stay ahead of schedule, and then you can mix in the heavier play action.
It's funny you're talking about this, and it's normal you think about the young quarterback who's getting impatient, but it can be the head coach or the play caller as well. And Ryan Day has talked about being a little too pass happy in the past and maybe getting away from the run too much. He has said it often enough that you would assume he is sort of cognizant of it, and will try and be cognizant of it during the game as well. The idea of Will Johnson following Marvin Harrison around the field. Harrison was asked about Will Johnson specifically on Tuesday when we talked to him. And he talked about the fact that they have really, most teams have not done that. They have not had, I think Penn State, he said, was the only team that really just kind of took one guy and put him on Marvin Harrison. Otherwise, if you move Marvin Harrison around, you're getting different matchups. Is that the biggest, I mean, you said that's the biggest advantage Ohio State has, or the biggest weakness on the Michigan defense. Where would Cade Stover fall into that? Because it feels like if Michigan is sort of scrambling, you've got, split safeties, you got two corners to cover three receivers, really, and then you throw Cade Stover into this. How does Michigan defend him? Are they just throwing one of the linebackers on him and just kind of crossing their fingers?
Again, I mean, I expect Michigan to be principally playing zone defense, and I think where Stover comes in handy is particularly like Michigan likes to spot drop. And so we've talked about that with Ohio State. Obviously, they don't do it as much this year, but covering grass, like you saw Maryland take a lot of advantage of that. That came up in basically two ways. So Maryland ran a bunch of RPOs with the backside slant, and the nickel was not locked on the slant. So again, like we've talked all year about, Ohio State has been pretty successful with RPOs. I think Kyle McCord runs them well. Ohio State, I would consider as a team that dabbles in RPOs. They don't major in them. Maryland certainly runs more RPOs than Ohio State, but I would certainly expect Ohio State to RPO them early, particularly if they're going to play, quarter, half on early downs. And then the other thing, as I said, off of play action, like Stover, particularly when you're like finding those holes in the zone. Maryland had a lot of success with sort of underneath crossers, drags. They had that. Ironically, Maryland had their tight end wide open off of sort of a delayed release route, the same, very similar to what Ohio State ran last year on 4th and 2 against Michigan. That Michigan at that point seemed to know exactly what Ohio State was doing on that play, but against Maryland, they did not. And so, again, so I think you're going to look for ways to exploit pieces in the zone and try to get Stover again, because I just think there's some plus matchups, like Michael Barrett for Michigan he's kind of undersized. But he's a very good blitzer. Junior Colson is up and down. He can sort of lose his responsibilities. So again, I just think that those are the areas that you're looking to exploit. And again, to me, it's a matter of, I think personnel-wise, Ohio State has advantages, particularly at the skill positions versus the Michigan back seven. I think the concern to me comes into when Ohio State gets behind schedule and Michigan's scheme and the pass protection against it.
And even when Ohio State can stay on schedule and kind of methodically move down the field, move the chains, take what's being given to them, eventually you get down to the red zone and then the field compresses, and Ohio State has not always been great in the red zone this year or in short yardage. Michigan has been very effective in the red zone this year in the limited exposures their defense has had to the red zone. How big of a concern is that going into this game for you, for the Buckeyes? And how would you try to attack Michigan when you're in 1st and goal from the 5, 3rd and goal from the 2, whatever it is? When you're in that sort of compressed field, how does the game plan change for Ohio State down there?
It's certainly a concern, and I can't imagine it's going to suddenly be perfect when it hasn't been. And so Ohio State may have to settle for a field goal at some point, frustratingly so. But, I think the first question is, can Devin Brown play? If he can, I would go back to that package. And certainly like in the low red zone situation you're talking about. I think it was pretty effective. It's now been a while since Ohio State did that because of his lack of availability. So it probably is not going to be on the top of Michigan's mind. I'm sure they've prepared for it, but that would be my first response. Secondly, I mean, I think you got to go with your best players and what's worked best in those situations. So I would look for, when Harrison singled up, going to Harrison. I mean, like what's worked really well, even more so than like sort of the fade and comeback fade routes, is Harrison on slants inside the 5-yard line. I mean, we saw that against Minnesota. We saw that against Michigan State. Like when you get that Ibuka to basically run off the coverage to the corner and then Harrison comes underneath it. I would continue to look for Ibuka and maybe Xavier Johnson on like jet sweeps, orbit motion, things of that nature. Obviously that did not work against Notre Dame. The one time they tried it, it was much more effective last week in short yardage. Ohio State has been better in short yardage and the low red zone. Their problems against Minnesota were not even so much at the goal line. It was more just like inside the red zone. And they had a drive or two that sputtered out from lack of precision in the passing game. And so again, like in those situations, I go back to my biggest concern with Michigan, which is, Jesse Minter has a lot of fire zones and creeper pressures. Fire zones, you're bringing 5 people. Creepers, you're bringing 4, but they're not your 4 defensive linemen. And playing, 2 deep or 3 deep coverages behind it. And we've seen Wisconsin had some success against Ohio State. Rutgers had some success using those kind of pressures that overload one side, and Ohio State doesn't read it well. And or, Kyle McCord hasn't been the greatest under pressure. He can get sped up. And so that's why, it's not even so much like a matchup of being concerned about someone getting beat one-on-one up front against the pressure. It's like the collective offensive line plus tight ends plus Travion Henderson diagnosing the pressure, picking it up, and then McCord staying in it, keeping his feet underneath him, and not getting sped up.
So this all sounds great. It sounds like there is a path for Ohio State to be successful on offense, move the ball maybe somewhat consistently on offense. If they kind of stay with the program, they got to score when they get down to the red zone. What are you expecting from the Ohio State offense in terms of a point output? Are you expecting are you expecting them to stick with what's working and not make the big mistake? What is your sort of, I guess I'm sort of asking you for half of a score prediction right now in some sort of way. And I will throw my hands up and say my score prediction talks about the possibility Ohio State wins by a bunch, the possibility Michigan wins by a bunch, and the possibility that it's a close score. So I'm kind of throwing my hands up at this point and going, yeah, I don't know, man. We'll see how it goes. So Ross, be our expert and tell me what is actually going to happen, because I'm kind of super interested but not confident in my prediction.
I think either team, if you could get to 26 points, you'd feel pretty good about your chances. I have trouble seeing. It just depends if Ohio State can create explosives. It's easy to say, like, be patient, move the ball down the field. Like, there's a reason explosive plays matter because it makes it easier to score points, right? And Michigan, like Ohio State, does a pretty good job of limiting those. Now, I will say Maryland had multiple chances on Saturday against both Wallace and Will Johnson down the field. They only hit one of them. They missed probably 4 or 5. So those will be there. And so it's, again, a matter of like, can Ohio State hit those? If they can hit some of those, then that makes life easier, right? And so those high leverage plays, you got to complete them. You got to give Harrison and Ibuka and Stover a chance down the seam. But I do think, obviously, then like relying on Travion Henderson's the key. But I just don't see a super high scoring output from either team, because I just think both defenses are good. And I just would prepare yourselves for situations where Ohio State moves the ball and gets several first downs, and then Michigan blows up a drive because they bring a creeper pressure that doesn't get picked up, and it puts Ohio State behind the chains. I mean, especially being on the road, it's going to be hard on the snap count. It's going to be hard, diagnosing things. So it's hard after 11 games. You kind of are what you are to some extent. So we've seen that. And so I don't see it all of a sudden becoming magically better. But at the flip side, we've seen Ohio State move the football against every team they played against, and they've played some very good defenses, and they've played some of those defenses without Henderson or Ibuka. And so having everyone back. And I still think McCord has continued to improve as the season goes on. So I don't see this either as a situation where it's a total rock fight.
My score prediction is 20-17 someone, and I'm kind of just going to flip a coin in terms of which team I actually give the 20 points to in our official score predictions at BuckeyeHuddle.com. But yeah, it should be a pretty entertaining game. And don't worry if it's low scoring. Don't worry, the winner gets Iowa next week, so it'll get much more exciting a week from now.
I mean, I still just think if you were lining up just like from a talent perspective, right? Like Michigan's defense, they're very experienced. They have a lot of volume of things they do. I do not think you're looking at a lot of high round NFL draft picks. Like maybe Will Johnson, maybe the defensive tackles, which defensive tackles can cause a lot of, like, they can blow everything up if they're really good. But they're experienced and they execute the scheme well. So it's for Ohio State. It's just, you gotta find the matchups when you got them and take advantage of them.
Well, that sounds like it would be great preparation for Iowa if that is who Ohio State is playing a week from now. It sounds a lot like the Iowa defense in a lot of ways. So we'll worry about Iowa next week if and when Ohio State is playing them. This week, though, everyone in Ohio is worried about Michigan and nothing but Michigan. Ross will be back tomorrow to talk about the Ohio State defense and how they might fare against Michigan. But if you are while you're waiting the long 24 hours before that show, rest assured, there's plenty more content on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Tony Gerderman and I are doing 2 Buckeye weekly episodes a day for you at this point because, yeah, we know you're jonesing for the content. We are here to fill that need for you. We're doing bonus episodes on the Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning feed as well. If you're listening to this, you are probably subscribed to that, but doing lots of clips of interviews with all the Buckeyes we talked to this week, all the Wolverines we talked to, players and coaches and all that kind of stuff. So lots and lots of content for you as you're driving, as you're sitting, sleeping off the turkey on the couch, whatever it is. You can listen to lots and lots of Ohio State, Michigan talk on all of our shows. You can find the Skull Session podcast, the Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning podcast, the Buckeye Weekly podcast, the Big Me Kickoff podcast. They're all there. All just search for Buckeye Huddle on wherever you find your podcasts. You can find those shows. Leave us a 5-star rating and review, which will help other folks find those shows, which we would truly appreciate. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.